Welcome to the Hockey Writers Prospect Corner, a show with our top prospects writing crew, bringing you the latest news, analysis, scouting reports, mocks, rankings, and much more. From the World Juniors to the NHL Draft floor, from the farm to the NHL, our team covers everything that happens in the world of prospects. So sit back, grab a notebook, and get ready for Prospect Corner.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back into the Prospect Corner presented by the Hockey Writers. I am, of course, your host, Matthew Zator, once again joined in by my co-hosts, Peter Baracchini and Devin Little. We are also very excited to welcome in Tony Ferrari from the Hockey News, Sports Illustrated. He also hosts Game Tape with Tony. He interviews top prospects, breaks down their game, the video from their shifts. Love that podcast there. So welcome, Tony. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here, boys. It's going to be fun to talk some prospects.
Always. Before we get started, just wanted to let you know about the morning skate, as we always plug that at the Hockey Writers here. A daily newsletter delivered to your inbox Monday to Friday, jam-packed with the best hockey stuff on the planet. Daily dose of the latest news, rumors, history, funnies, quizzes, all that stuff. A little hockey fun brought to you every day of the week from the Hockey Writers. You'll see a link in the show description there. So definitely check that out. So this week we're going to be talking, first we're going to talk about the CHL NHL Top Prospects Game, which was just done. Really fun game to watch. And then we're going to be talking Finnish prospects. We talked about the Swedes last week with Alexa, and this week is going to be Finns and some fun stuff thrown in there as well. So let's get started. We'll talk about the CHL NHL Top Prospects Game, which said was a fun game to watch. A lot of the top prospects playing in that. Let's just start with the initial thoughts of the game. We'll start with you, Tony. What are your initial thoughts on that, watching that game there?
Well, I remember driving up to it, and I'm from Windsor, so I drove up to Kitchener for the day, and a little bit of a drive, and I had lots of time to think. And my thought was consistently, I'm not going to take much away from this game in terms of the actual play, but meeting people and seeing some of the people that we haven't seen in the last 3 years, basically because of the pandemic, will be great. It'll be fantastic. And then I got there and watched practices, and I got to take everything away from this game and be completely overreactionary. And it was a good time, though. Honestly, the game was fun. You can't overreact to the one glorified exhibition game at the end of the day. But it was really intense, actually. That was my big thing that I took away, is it felt more like a real game than an all-star game, because you see these events and guys aren't willing to hit and stuff, and they're lightly kind of routing guys out against the boards. Well, a guy like Noah Warren just laid into Shane Wright a couple of times in this game. There was some big hits in this game, and seeing that intensity, and it was a lowest scoring game too, ended up being 3-1. So it was wow, this felt like more of a real game than I was expecting.
It definitely did to me too. It felt more like, watching a regular game, which was great. I mean, 3-1, it wasn't high scoring. It was a really good game. Peter, what did you think about the game watching it? Initial thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good. I mean, obviously we were going to look at the forwards and defense and who was going to come out on top, because there was a great balance on both sides. But I thought it was a really good goaltending battle from both, Team White and Team Red. Zhigalov made a couple great saves, although he allowed 3 goals against. Really can't fault him, because there were some lapses leading up to those plays. But even, with the play of Tyler Brennan, who's the supposed top goaltender, Mason Beaupit looked great, but also Reed Dick. I mean, he was just absolutely phenomenal coming in to halfway through the game, and he just looked absolutely great and stellar, and had great poise and great confidence. So it was really great to see that goaltending battle happen, because there's really no runaway top tier classic we did have in the past with Askarov in 2020, the battle with Kosa and Wallstedt last year. So to see this battle, I think it's the goaltending names or the right rankings may change a little bit.
Yeah, the goaltending was really good in that game. Devin, we'll finish with you. What do you think about the game? Takeaways from it?
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off the idea of it being more like an actual game instead of an exhibition, I think that you kind of got a better look at what some of these players would look like in an actual game atmosphere, right? If I feel like you get when a game is exhibition and it's an all-star type of deal, you're not really getting the full picture of what a player might look like in certain situations. But if it's competitive and it's like, a goaltending duel, you're going to see players have to make plays, and you're going to see them have to, take the thing seriously. And so you're actually going to see what players look like when they're a bit under pressure. I think Shane Wright stood out as he should have. I think more and more, the more that people doubt him, the more I think it's starting to become a little silly. And I think just for my own part, I thought Matthew Savoy really, really stood out. I thought he looked explosive at times during the game, and as probably my favorite prospect in the class, that warmed my heart to see.
Yeah. I mean, the game was really good. I thought it was very competitive. Lots of hitting, lots of scoring chances. Really, I mean, they outshot Team Red. Team White outshot them like crazy. I think they were stuck on 4 shots forever. I felt like. So, I mean, let's talk about a couple of the guys that really stood out in this game was Jagger, Firkus, and Shane Wright. Of course, Shane Wright it was expected to be a guy that you would want to stand out in this game. So he's an obvious one, but Jagger, Firkus, before we get to him, let's talk about Shane Wright for a sec. Is he still the first overall favorite for the first overall pick? Tony, is he still there, or is a guy like Logan Cooley kind of pushing at him, or has he done enough to be still the first overall?
In my opinion, he's still the first overall pick. Like he's been that all year. I think one of the things you look at with him is, okay, you missed all of last year. And I know everyone keeps saying that as an excuse and yada, yada, yada. Well, he's still not producing like we expected. Okay. But look at the rates of he's scoring on based on month. Every month it's gone up. I posted on Twitter recently where it was like the first month it was like one point per game. Second month went up to 1.2, then 1.3. And then December was short because he went to the World Juniors, but it was like 2.5. And then January, February, March all went up. He's up at, I think, 1.6 in March, 1.7 in March. So it's like he's getting to that level we all kind of expected him to get. And this is something I've tried to stress with this draft class is while a lot of us are a little bit down on this draft class compared to where we were about a year ago, 2 years ago on this group, because everyone thought this was going to be a really good group. I think we all kind of need to realize that while some kids are going to be irreparably hurt by this, unfortunately, that's going to suck. There are going to be kids that are just a year behind where they were supposed to be anyways. Yeah. So the season we're expecting from Shane Wright, we might get that next year. And that might be the big step for him. So I don't know if that's going to be the case, but it's certainly trending that way. So for me, Shane Wright's still the number one guy, and it's going to be fun to kind of see what he does going forward.
I mean, you look at his numbers. I mean, they're not bad. You look at 78 points in 53 games. I mean, he's not like I guess you're expecting more domination maybe, but I think the way he is, like you said, I think he's still that first overall pick. We may see that big season for him next year if he doesn't make the NHL, which, I mean, you don't know if he will or not. Yeah. So, I mean, I think we can all agree that he's still that first overall. Peter, you still have him as first. I still have him at first. So, I mean, I think we're all in agreement he's still there. Cooley's been amazing too. I mean, it doesn't matter. The team that gets him is I don't think they're gonna be disappointed. So, I mean, he's still first for sure. Let's talk about Jagger Firkus now. I mean, this guy, this game, he was really good. A guy that you wouldn't think would be a dominant guy. He's not really talked about in that first round. I mean, some may have him there. Tony, do you think he's done enough to push himself into that conversation as a first round pick? What did you think about his game during that Top Prospects game?
He was really good, and he was pretty pinnacle Jagger Firkus. He was a guy that was just crazy shifty hands, cut into the middle of the ice. That shot was wicked. Like I was on that end of the rink when he shot that, like right from the side of the press box, and seeing his shot, I was just like, oh damn, all right, okay, like, do your thing, boy. Like it was fantastic. The move to the inside, everything, and that's what his game is. He's always doing that, like with the Warriors in the dub, and you want to see him do a little bit more because you always want to see a player do it more. But with this draft class, he's kind of the guy that does that more than anyone. So asking even more of him, because a lot of people go, well, he's small. He doesn't do it enough. And you're like, I don't know how much Jagger Firkus you've been watching, because that's all he does, right? Like, he just uses his hands, cuts the inside, and he's not going to be able to do that as much at the NHL level, I don't think, because they are defenders that are going to be just bigger, stronger, and with the skating ability to kind of stop him. But he's going to still try to do it. He's still going to be able to translate that game to the next level. And of course there'll be adjustments made, but man, this kid's fantastic. He was at the end of my first round going into this game. And like I said, what I usually do after these games is I don't touch my rankings for a week, because I don't want to make that rash judgment. But yeah, he's a guy that, like, he's been on the upward trajectory. He's at, I think, 27 or 28 on my board, and he's just kind of moving up from there. So I wouldn't be shocked to kind of see him sneak into that 20 range by the end of the year, because he does so many things you'd want to see from a guy outside of being 6'2". So yeah, there's not much more you can ask for him.
In the end, I mean, this was a 1 game sample size, so it is probably safe not to jump in and say, your Firkus should be in the top 10 now. No, he was impressive, and these games are a showcase. They do. I mean, scouts do look at it. They do say, how they perform in a game with their peers, and Firkus did a lot for himself in that one. Peter, Devin, have anything to add to that Firkus conversation, or has Tony said it all there?
Kid's got moxie.
Yeah. I mean, Tony talked about, like, his ability to go to the inside and, like, cut to the middle. I mean, that may not translate well, because there are going to be bigger players, but considering the fact that, he doesn't let his size get the best of him, he doesn't let it be a hindrance. He plays a tough, not gritty game, but he's very intense. He's very high end, and he plays with a high level pace. So the fact that he's able to get to the middle, despite being not a big, like, having a big frame, I think is going to go well for him, because teams value the middle of the ice. I mean, that's the high danger area. That's where you get most of your damage, or most of the damage should be done. So the fact that he's got that going for him, I think he does put himself in that conversation. He's just outside for me as an early second, but yeah, first round is definitely not out of the question.
For sure. I mean, he did a lot to to put his name on the map, for sure. Let's talk about some other guys. Peter, we'll start with you. Anyone else that kind of stood out in that game apart from Firkus and Wright there?
I'm going to say Tristan Luneau. He was a player that's supposed to be top 10, top 15 kind of player with that two-way mobility, kind of in the mold of Drew Doughty. Didn't have the start that he wanted. Production wasn't there. It kind of fell off to going into that 25 later first round, second, maybe even mid-second, because of his play. But then the production started to rise. He didn't get a point, but I love his ability to play in transition, block plays. And Tony mentioned the physicality. He was I thought he made a couple of really great hits along the board, playing with that edge, playing with that mentality. And I think maybe this could have been a game where, he was falling down the rankings. Maybe this is something that will pick his game back up and maybe get more confidence in the, from the NHL scouts, that maybe he does have what it takes to possibly be a top 20 and move up in the rankings.
Yeah, Luno was a guy I kind of noticed a lot in that game as well. Devin, who did you see as someone that kind of made a lasting impression in that game?
Well, I think back to Shane Wright's goal, and I think about the 2-on-1 he had with Danny Zilkin. And I think that Zilkin made a name for himself in that he played well, played off of Shane Wright, which high-end talent for sure. And when you look across like rankings, Zilkin's like all over the place. He's a late first or a late second. He's all over the place. And I think that his ability to, play off of talent and look good doing it, I think that puts him on the map a little bit more than he was. So, and I also think just overall throughout the game, he kind of showed signs of a really well-rounded game. And I think that, like you said before, Matt, it's a 1-game sample. You can't read too much into it, but at the same time, there definitely was a lot of promise in his game. So I know that, you almost want to take a second look at him and see if it was a 1-game thing, or if it's like, ooh, is there something more there? Because like I said, he's all over the place when it comes to the community.
And guys like that, there are players that it is a skill to play with high end players. I mean,
absolutely.
You can say, you can throw anyone with Connor McDavid and they'll be good. I mean, not always. I mean, you have to have a modicum of skill and hockey IQ and stuff to play with these guys, or you're not going to be in the positions to receive passes from them or whatever, right? So you still need other skills rather than just like, oh, I'll play with a good player and I'll be good. That's not always the case, right? Tony, we'll finish off with you. Who did you see as a guy that made a lasting impression, could raise their draft stock just from this game?
Well, I think one guy that definitely put I don't know if he put his name on the map, but he's a guy that I know hockey people really like there. And that was Maciej Sapovalev from Saginaw. Mm-hmm. The two-way center, big boy, tall, a little bit lanky still. He's got a little bit the size that he's going to need to pack onto that frame, but he was excellent defensively. He was the team's penalty kill at one point where he was making every play. He broke up a play and then sent a teammate on a breakaway on the for a shorthanded chance. And he just did a lot of really good things, using his reach really well, reading the passing lanes, understanding where he needed to be positionally. And he did a lot of really smart things. Is his ceiling all that high? Probably not. He's someone compared him to Hellenius from a couple years ago in the draft. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of the similar player, a defensive guy, could be on the third line, fourth line. You can just rely on him to be good. But so as for someone a little bit more exciting, a guy like Kevin Korchinski, I think really kind of showcased some of his talents in this game. He's a guy that I've been really high on all year because he's got such good transitional ability and the ability to kind of, in this is an underrated defensive aspect of the game of going to retrieving that puck on a dump in, turning around and knowing exactly where to send the puck, what to do with it, and how to do it. And he has the skill to do it as well. He's an elusive skater. He's got some really quick, tight turns. And then the offensive zone, you see him kind of freelance a little bit. You see him get down below the dots. You see him walk down the boards and make a play on the cycle and work his way to the front of the net. He did a lot of really, really good things in this game. And I think, if anything, it's just going to get people to kind of look at him and go, oh, maybe he should be among the top defensemen in this draft.
I know, Peter, you like Korchinski for sure. So
I do. Yep.
He's been impressive as well. For me, I really like Matthew Savoy. I mean, he wasn't noticeable all game, but when he was, I mean, saw that rush he made to the net, got in front of Mats Lindgren, and that's what he does. I mean, you see a lot of his games, a lot of his tape. That's his game. He's not afraid of the middle of the ice, even though he's quite small. I mean, 5'9". But he's not afraid to go to the net. He's not afraid to use his speed to get there. And he's a highly skilled centerman. I think we have a lot of guys have him in that top 5 range. And he did show it in bursts of that game, even though that his team didn't get many shots on goal. So he was, for me, a guy that stood out.
And
showed a lot of his skill for sure.
One thing on Savoy before we move on from him real quick is I thought it was really interesting that on this lineup sheet that they gave us at the game, he was listed as the right winger. And then in the game, he barely took any faceoffs. He primarily played along the wing. And I think that's kind of dictating what NHL teams see as for him going forward. I personally believe that he could be a center moving forward, kind of like a Braden Point type center where he is undersized, but he's still able to do everything. But at the same time, NHL teams are going to see what they want to see, and they're going to probably go, this is a small guy, he can't play center, and he's gonna have to earn every center rep he gets. So I just thought it was an interesting little thing that kind of dictated to me what NHL teams kind of saw in him.
Made a big hit too, so he also has that edge to him, and that was something that I didn't quite see before. So he's starting to pick that up.
I've really liked Savoy. I did his prospect profile the other day, and he's probably one of my favorites. Again, not just because his name's the same as mine. It's a bonus. There you go. Let's go to the other side of it and talk about some guys that didn't do a lot in that game. Didn't meet any expectations that you thought, oh, they should have been noticeable in this game. Even though it was one game, they should still be someone you see. Devin, we'll start with you. Anyone that stood out as not very good?
Well, we're going to pivot from Savoy to his teammate, Connor Geekie. Geekie he's a guy who's been ranked, pretty much in the top 10 almost exclusively from the start of the focus on this draft. And while I don't think he looks bad by any stretch of the imagination, he also didn't stand out like a guy with that kind of pedigree should stand out, in my opinion. On Team White, he was one of 5 players to be a -1, which I realize plus minus isn't the best stat in the world, but I think it does say something when, you're one of 5 players to have that distinction.
Yeah.
And he 4 for 10 out of on the faceoffs. He just didn't have, we're talking about how Savoy was very explosive and he showed, all sorts of things that he showed physicality that it hadn't before. I didn't see a ton from Geeky that I hadn't already seen before, or even then afterwards, I was left wanting more. So I'm not writing him off by any stretch of the imagination, but I definitely would have liked to have seen more out of him.
Yeah, that's fair. Peter, who'd you see as not standing out in a good way?
I had a brief conversation with Tony before all this happened, and I'm going with Jordan Donovan. He is a fantastic puck mover. He's got a great stride, great offensive capabilities, but his defensive awareness and his play in his own end was very noticeable. I know we all don't want to look at, plus minus as an indicator, but he was -3. And even Tony said, like, he got walked around quite a bit. And that to me is not something that you want if you're trying. Obviously, if he is going to be an offensive defenseman, great, but you got to be able to know when to pick your spots and when to go. And I think he's just a bit of a high risk player for me. Showed in that game. I think that maybe he didn't have the performance that maybe he would have liked to, that maybe other scouts are seeing with his play in the OHL, but I just didn't see it from him that game.
And these games are hard from my perspective, they're hard to play. These are guys that don't play a lot together. They're all from different teams, and it's hard to see that, flow and chemistry because they're an all-star team. They're not playing, you're not practicing with them. That's why I don't think the power plays for either side looked very crisp.
Yeah.
Because they don't practice it together. So this is a one-game thing. Tony, we'll finish off with you. Who'd you see as someone that didn't really stand out in a good way in that game?
Well, it's a guy that I've kind of been down on all year. I haven't ranked him once this year, despite some people having him in the first round, even a few people having him in the top 15. And that's Maverick Lamoureux, who's a defenseman from QMJHL. Huge frame. That's where the good ended with him. I feel bad saying that, but honestly, like, I was there for the practices, and you can't take much into practices and stuff like that because, like, it's practice. Are we talking about practice? Like, we can go Allen Iverson on this if we need to, but at the end of the day, like, watching him in practice, like, just simple, like, passes for a one-timer. He couldn't receive a pass properly, and there were just little things that I'm like, a base, like, any hockey player that's here should be able to do this, and he wasn't able to kind of complete that. And then in the game, he was sending pucks at and this could have been just not knowing where his teammates are going to be or not being used to the guys and stuff, but he's sending pucks to space where it's just like, all right, that's going for an icing, or he'd get walked a couple of times. He gets caught leaning over because he does have that huge frame. So defending and trying to get his stick on the ice and stuff, a lot of times he's leaning, he's kind of looking a little clumsy and kind of similar to how Geeky was. The difference is Geeky doesn't have to skate backwards and defend necessarily the way Maverick Lamoureux does. And because of that, it looked really bad. There were a couple times where he just didn't seem to understand what he was doing at this event, because it was an event with guys with such high skill. And I know some people think he's a high skill defenseman, but I don't see it. I haven't seen it all year. And in this game certainly wasn't the game that I was like, there it is, I'm finally seeing it.
Yeah, and like we said before, these games are and they're a showcase. The scouts definitely take it and look at it and look at the intricacies of the game that a lot of these prospects have. But in the end, you can't really say, you drop them to the 4th round because they weren't that good. They weren't that good in this game. But I get where you're coming from, Tony. You do see that stuff, and they should be at least being experts in the basic skills, right? In practice or in the game, right? So there is something to take away from it, I think, too. So varying opinions. So that's the prospects game. Let's move on to the Finnish prospects, which we haven't touched on this season too much, except for maybe the World Juniors. We kind of talked a bit about them, but let's do a little bit of a deep dive into the top Finnish prospects in this draft, starting with a guy that was supposed to be the first talked about in the first overall conversation at one point. Brad Lambert. He's kind of dropped off a bit. He's still being talked about in that top 15 range by a lot of people. Tony, we'll start with you. What do you think about Brad Lambert? His production isn't there this season, but obviously, I mean, a lot of scouts saw that he has a skill set to be that top 3 type guy. What did you think about Lambert this year?
I still think Brad Lambert's a top 5 player in this draft. I do. Like, he's got so many skills and tools that just other players don't even touch. And I think that's the big difference is this guy's, I think a question someone asked me recently is who's the player that has all the tools, but the toolbox isn't quite able to close it up. And I think that's Brad Lambert. He's a guy that you see the skating, you see the speed, the elusiveness, the hands, the puck skill, the ability to cut to the middle, the shot even is really good. His playmaking is excellent. He's got really nice touch on his passing. And you're like, but where are the points? And I think you have to question that. And you watch his games and everything. And especially when early in the season, he was kind of playing up and down the lineup. Even when he'd start the game on the second line, he ended up playing 4th line minutes, or he ended up playing with the 4th liners for the second half of the game. And you're like, all right, like this guy can't get a set role in the lineup. So what are you doing to really help develop this guy? And I think that's a big problem for him. And then when he got moved, he went to the Pelicans partway through the season, and the Pelicans are very bad, like not a good team whatsoever. So there are so many plays that end up dying as soon as he passes the puck off, or he'll be cutting through there was one play recently that I watched where he's cutting through the middle across the blue line. The defenders are nowhere near him, and the defenseman just dumps the puck right by him. And I'm like, all right, like, thanks for the help there, bud. I still think Brad's doing everything you want to see him doing for the most part. I do think he needs to be able to kind of tough it out and become a little bit more of an interior player, but he does do it from time to time at the men's level. And I always make this comparison. I always have to qualify that they're not stylistically the same player, but we all had this conversation about Lucas Raymond a couple years ago. We all went, why isn't he producing? Blah, blah, blah. He's playing against men. Let's be honest, guys. Like, he's an 18-year-old playing against 25, 30-year-olds, and he's getting pushed around a little bit. But when he is able to play his game and he gets the playing time in the run, you see those things that you want to see from him in everything. So it's a projection for sure, but I still think this guy's a top 5 pick, maybe even a top 3 guy.
Yeah. And Peter, I know we've talked about Lambert in the past with him, and, he was really good in the World Juniors a while ago. And he thought, he's a guy that's going to be in that conversation. Peter, what do you think about Brad Lambert?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go back even as far as even saying, like, in 2020 when Quinton Byfield was playing 4th line minutes for Team Canada, everyone was mad about the production. And even the year after that, when they took him second and he still had average production, points don't mean a lot. I mean, if he has the skill set, he already has the hands, the speed, the awareness, and everything that he's got that going for him. And like Tony mentioned, he was going up and down the lineup. He's playing on a bad team, but where I see the difference is when he was on the World Junior team, he wasn't playing first, second line. He was on the 3rd line with Samuel Hellenius, and I can't remember the life of me his other teammate on the wing, but they had instant chemistry, and Brad Lambert was the star on that line, going into the corners, being a factor offensively. And the fact that he had that strong performance shows that, hey, maybe we shouldn't take too much into consideration about what's going on outside, because there are a lot of other factors going for him. So I think that that's the biggest thing, that even if he was playing in a really good role and a good team like the junior team, I think he still has that factor going for him, and we shouldn't just look too much into the point. And again, he mentioned Lucas Raymond. I was going to say the exact same comparison, because we're all thinking the same thing, and it's true. I mean, don't look so much into the points. Even Quinton Byfield, don't look so much at the points. Brad Lambert's going to follow in that same pattern as well.
And Lucas Raymond's been pretty good, so
he's decent, I guess, right?
He's okay.
He's been fine. He's been fine. Devin knows all about Lucas Raymond. So let's talk about Brad Lambert then. Devin, what did you think about his game this year, and why is that production not there?
Well, I love the Lucas Raymond comparison for obvious reasons. But beyond that, there's a couple other players that honestly the situation kind of makes me think of One of them being a Red Wing, go figure. And that would be Joe Veleno last year while playing in Sweden. And it was a similar situation where he himself had a lot of tools in this kit and was doing a lot of good things, but he was on a really bad team. So he could do all these things he wanted to, but he was passing to people that couldn't execute, or he was getting passes that weren't tape to tape. You can have all the skill in the world, but if you're not playing with players that can complement you, you're screwed. And then the other player that it kind of makes me think of, different extent, mind you, but is Aatu Ratu from last year. Ratu had, he was another one of those players that was projected to go in the first round, and the production just wasn't there, and things just seemed off with him. And he fell all the way to the second round to the Islanders. And now this year he's looking like his old self again.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where this is where I think some people almost kind of get lost in just numbers on a page, because it doesn't tell the whole story. You have to have that context. It's one thing if you're not producing a stacked team, but if you're playing, on a weak team and you're not producing, it's probably a bit more to that than what you're realizing. And it's just an exercise in realizing that the player themselves can still be very good and have all the skills in the world, but they got to have players to play with them too.
Yeah. And that's why scouting's so difficult.
Absolutely.
You can't just look at numbers and say, this guy had the highest goals, he's now first overall. You can't look at it that way, because like you say, if they're on a stacked team and they got so many good players around them, and then they go to, there's something to say about a guy that does produce on a team that doesn't have a lot of good players. There's something to say about that too. But there's a lot of things that go into looking at what a player will be in the future, and so that's why they employ high amounts of scouts. That's why these departments are massive. It's not just one guy. It's an interesting thing with Lambert. I think he will end up being in that range. I think he won't drop to where Aatu Ratu went. I don't think that's happening. I don't think he's dropping to the second round.
That'd be a big mistake.
Yeah, so I think he will be in the first round at some point.
Teams will trade up to take him before then. Like, there's no way.
No, it's
yeah, I think the difference between that with Ratu and now Lambert is, with Ratu there was so much of that like undertone of the skill. Like, it was very like, he wasn't that flashy guy. He wasn't the guy that flashed all these tools. Whereas Lambert does do that. So teams will at least look at Lambert and go, oh, he's got this, and this. He just needs to put it together. And one point I also wanted to make on what Devin was saying is, like, a lot of people look at the numbers and they go, okay, well, he's not producing these numbers. And that's why I think there is this element of advanced metrics that do provide such an extended context, because when you look at a lot of his advanced numbers, whether it's Will Scouts tracking it or Lassi Alinen from Elite Prospects, their numbers come out and you're like, okay, his transition numbers are good. This is good. This is good. And you look down the list and it's like, okay, so his counting stats aren't good. So you looked at his Elite Prospects page and went, he's not producing. He's not doing anything. and I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into. And I'll be honest, I know there's NHL scouts that do it because I've talked to them about it. So it's like, this happens at every level of this game. So it's fun, but it's also kind of sad.
Something to say about advanced metrics, that's for sure. They do show a lot more of the big picture, which is awesome. Used to be that wasn't even part of the talking points in scouting. Advanced stats everywhere. There's whole departments on them now too. So it's becoming a bigger thing around for sure. So let's talk about a guy that used to play with Brad Lambert, Joakim Kemell, who has been in the talking about being a guy that could potentially go second overall, third overall in that conversation. He's had a great start to the season, 15 goals in 39 games, 23 points with JYP. He tailed off after the wrist injury, which came back, kind of took a while to kind of get going. Played in the World Juniors before it was canceled or postponed. Looks like he's found his groove again. Tony, is he the next shooting threat to keep an eye on? I mean, he's somewhat of a goal scorer for sure.
Yeah, he's a pretty decent goal scorer, I guess. I think one player I like to make the comparison with him to, and coincidentally, since we were talking about Brad Lambert and Lucas Raymond, is Alexander Holtz, a player that he has this unreal shot. He's got this incredibly impressive offensive game, but he loves shooting from low danger like it's his best friend. Like that is his bread and butter. And Joakim Kemell is the same thing. And we've seen, and I actually just wrote something for the Hockey News on Holtz and how this year he's starting to score more, and he's one of the top under 20 goal scorers of all time on a rate basis in the AHL. And it's because he's pushing closer to the net. And I think Joakim Kemell needs to do the same thing. And at the start of the year, he was shooting around 30% when he was, I think he had 13 goals in 15 games. And you're like, okay, like this is not sustainable. And that was when everyone was jumping him up to number 2 on the board, and everyone was like, he's going to challenge Wright. And I think a few people even had him number 1. And I'm like, he's shooting 30% from above the dots. Like there's not many players in the NHL that can do that outside of maybe Alexander Ovechkin. You can throw Patrick Laine in the mix maybe. And he, look how streaky he's been throughout his career. Yeah. So how much do you really want to put on a guy like Joakim Kemell for his shooting talent? Because there are holes in the rest of his game, I think. And that's been my biggest kind of trepidation with putting him too high. I think the highest he's gotten on my board is 7 or 8 this year. And he hasn't once passed Brad Lambert. So for me, it's like, yes, he's the opposite of Brad Lambert. He's putting up these numbers. He's scoring a ton of goals. He's got all this stuff going for him. But when you look at every other metric, like we talked about with Brad Lambert, it's not quite as impressive. And then you account for the shooting percentage hike, which is, I mean, that was a big thing that came down after the wrist injury. And the thing he said was the wrist injury. I was talking to him recently, and he said the wrist injury didn't hurt him at the World Juniors, but it wasn't hurting him when he got back to league play after that. And that could just be him saying it because he's a hockey player and they want to be the tough guy and stuff. But at the end of the day, the wrist injury can only account for so much, and maybe it does affect him the rest of the year. But shooting from above the dots and at 30% isn't sustainable. So he's even started kind of pushing towards the net a little bit more. And when you do that, you're going to score more. And that's kind of been what's kind of triggered this resurgence that he's had the last few games. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of where he ends up, because I do see a team that goes like, this could be the goal scorer that we need, and they could take him 3rd, 4th overall, or he could kind of fall down the board a little bit to 7 or 8, like Alexander Holtz did. And he's still going to be a top 10 pick in reality though.
Kemell's, I fell into the trap. I had him, but I have him 3, I think. I mean, so I did fall into that trap as well, but I get what you're saying, Tony, about that. It's not sustainable, 30% shooting there. So there's only certain guys that can do that at a consistent basis, and they're probably quote unquote that generational talent. And like 2 guys, I mean, Laine maybe pushing that, but
that's what I mean, right? Like Laine is pushing that, and like even with Kemell, like it's easy to fall into that trap because when he lets that shot go, you're like, damn, that's a nice shot. Like it's super easy to fall into that trap.
I would just to correct myself on the sheet. I did write wrist injury. It was actually a shoulder injury for
shoulder.
Yes, so that is my bad. When writing that, so if you hear wrist, just replace shoulder.
Upper body injury.
upper body. Yeah, there we go. Let's just go upper body.
Just say upper body injury.
I'm just waiting for the NHL to get even more vague and be like, he has a full body injury. Like, he clearly walked away holding his wrist, but it's his whole body.
Yeah,
it's something in that range. Let's talk about a guy that again, he's not Finnish. Just preface this, but he does play in the Finnish league, and Juraj Slafkovsky. So, I mean, we're talking about Finns here, but he deserves to be talked about here because he plays in this league and, well, what he did in the Olympics, 7 goals in 7 games. Yeah. He's pushed himself in that conversation, and that some guys have him at 2, 3. Let's talk about him. Tony, how much did that tournament impact his stock? I mean, he wasn't in that range beforehand.
Yeah, I think he was a guy that everyone was like, okay, this is a 5 to 12 guy or a 6 to 12 guy. And I think the tournament pushed him into that top 5 possibly. And that's kind of where he's at on my board. I think he's at 5 or 6 on my board right now. And that's just it. Like you saw all these tools with him. Like he has the size, he skates okay. Like his skating isn't bad for his size. And he has the offensive tools that you want to see. And the thing I found really impressive was all year long, I felt like this guy's going to be a really good, skilled, big playmaker. And then he goes to the Olympics and scores more goals than anybody else. And I was like, okay, maybe he has a shot too, I guess. And you always saw like little flashes of the shot and stuff, but it was always like he'd opt out of shooting and he'd take a pass and he'd make a pass to the back door or something. And that was his game. So seeing that like extra step at the Olympics was really what kind of gave me the courage to, I don't want to say courage, but I'm so courageous for moving him on my board. No, but that gave me the oomph to move him up a little bit, because that goal scoring touch that I was like, you see flashes of it, but it's not there consistently. He doesn't have the mindset to do it. That mindset was there. He wanted to be the goal scorer. He wanted to be the guy for his team at the Olympics. And at the end of the day, it was just such an impressive performance. Still, he shot a really high shooting percentage and everything. So you always got to be cautious, stuff like that. But man, like the tools that this kid has, if he's not in your top 5, he should probably be in your top 10. If he's not in your top 10, you're probably not evaluating right.
He's also a big guy, 6'4",
for sure,
218. Sure. I mean, he's got size. There's going to be teams looking at that, and that still matters. I mean, as much as everyone's saying maybe size doesn't matter as much anymore, it does. I mean, a lot of teams still look at this in their valuation of players. You need size to play in the league still. So I mean, there are guys that have him at that 2. Bob McKenzie has 5. TSN. I mean, Craig Button has him at 3, and Sam Cosentino has him at 2. So there are guys that have him in that top 2 range. So we'll see if a team goes and looks at him there. But like we've said in the past, a lot of teams value centermen at that point. There's so many centermen in that top 10, and Slafkovsky's that winger, which could drop him off because of that. So we'll see what happens. It's gonna be interesting to see what team gets him, and I think they're gonna be happy when they do get him for sure.
If teams want to bully, then you go for Slafkovsky, because he just pushes his way through no matter where he is. He just takes control of the situation.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, right? He brings that element that isn't brought by many players anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that, like you said, the size, the physicality, that's an element that if you can use it functionally, like that's what I always say is I love functional physicality. The problem is there are too many guys that are using physicality just to use it. Mm-hmm. But Slafkovsky has that functional physicality. He'll use his arm to hold a guy out. He'll cut to the middle and push his way there. He'll get there against men even. Like it's really impressive to see this kid's game kind of evolve. And like I said, if he can really kind of bring that goal scoring instinct out, like he's going to be a fun player to watch the next level.
Yeah, I definitely agree. He's an exciting player to watch, and he sure took the bull by the horns in that Olympics and brought his team to a bronze medal. So that's amazing. So before we move on to the back half of the show, I just reset the show here. This is the Prospect Corner presented by the Hockey Writers. We're talking Finnish prospects here, and we just talked about a Slovakian, but we're still going to talk some Finns in the next segment. Before we move on, I just want to tell you to remind you about the Morning Skate newsletter. Great newsletter with all the great hockey stuff on the planet, daily dose of news, rumors, history, all that fun stuff brought to you every morning. So take your coffee with it. It's a great set of stories and fun stuff from a lot of the writers here that it's not on the website. So you have to subscribe to that newsletter to get that stuff. You'll see that link in the notes show description. So definitely sign up for that. Well, let's move on to some other notable names on the Finnish side and talk about a goaltender. Tyler Brennan is arguably that top goaltender in the draft. He's not Finnish, but let's talk about a guy, Topias Leinonen. Hopefully I said that right. Let's talk about him. Has he got a potential to kind of move into that spot? Peter, we'll start with you. Is he the next guy apart from Tyler Brennan in this draft?
And again, I kind of mentioned this before where you don't have a clear cut number one, but yeah, he definitely has the potential. I mean, he's got the movement. Obviously, when you're looking at a goaltender, he has great size and he takes up a good chunk of the net. He's very square with the shooter. Doesn't panic. I mean, the one thing that I look for is the ability to like read and track the situation, especially in front of the crease. He doesn't panic. He's very calm. And I think he's got that going for him. I think that if you're able to play in those high pressure situations and you don't falter, I think you've got a really good goaltender on your hands. And he does just that. And, this season he has a .916 save percentage and .228 and at the junior level for goals against average. So he's playing really well, putting up good numbers. I think he does have the potential to try and surpass him, but then again, this year is kind of hard to try and get a grasp on goaltenders. But if you're looking at a top two push Brennan for that, or like a top goaltender to push him for that, it is going to be him.
For sure. Tony, what do you think about Topias Leinonen and his potential to be a top goaltender in this draft?
Yeah, right now he's my top goaltender in this draft, but he's not ranked either, like on my board. So I think that's more of an indication of this draft just not having many really good goaltenders. Even last year, like you look at a few other guys down the board or the last few years, and you're like, okay, the second or third guy is probably better than most of the guys in this draft. And I think this year's draft, you're getting a Tyler Brennan, a Topias Leinonen, and you're like, okay, like this is the guy we put into our system and see what happens, because goalies are kind of weird and they develop weird, and no one really scouts goalies with a goalie scout. So it's like how like a lot of teams are just going, this guy has decent numbers in this league, so we'll take him because we need a goalie in our system. And I think this year is the perfect year to do that in the 4th, 5th round, because there's going to be some goalie that comes out of this draft. Probably there always seems to be one goalie out of every draft, and who knows who it'll be in this draft, but it could easily be Topias Leinonen, because like I said, he is my top goalie right now. He moves pretty well, like Peter said, doesn't panic too much. And I mean, the Finns always seem to develop pretty good goalies. So even if you're just going to go, you know what, I'm just going to go through that system, that's probably a decent bet.
Yeah. There's no Jesper Wallstedt in this draft. There's no Sebastian Kosa. There's no Yaroslav Askarov. So you just have to maybe throw some darts at a board and hopefully hit one. So goaltenders take a long time to develop, like we said before. So you can draft a guy in the 6th round and they become a starter down the road. So it's just whatever. I mean, whatever happens, pick a guy and hope for the best. Devin, you have anything to add to that, or has it all been said here?
Not really. It just kind of like what's already been said. It just reflects the overall uncertainty of the goalie class this year, where even the best, even the top goalie isn't, a unanimous choice. So it's just going to be a matter of if you need a goalie, take one when you can and hope for the best, because like you said, there's not a Wallstedt, there's not a Kosa, there's not an Askarov. So it's just going to be a matter of rolling the dice when you see fit.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go from the net out to the defense and talk about a top defensive prospect in Otto Salin. Tony, what stands out about his game? What makes him the top defender from the Finnish side here?
Well, it's weird because he didn't start the year really all that great, because he got hurt pretty early on. He played a few games and then was hurt, and then didn't come back until fairly recently, I think, just after the new year. And he's been good. He's a good puck moving defenseman, skates fairly well. There's not a ton of like high end flair to his game or flash to his game, but he's a guy that moves the puck. He probably ends up being a Travis Dermott type defenseman, where you're like, okay, you see all the tools that should mean he could be an offensive defenseman, but hey, he ends up being pretty good in transition, defending the rush and stuff like that. And you kind of get a second, third pairing guy out of him there. But I don't know if there's a Finn that you look at and you're like, that's a really high end defenseman this year. But Otto Salin's probably the guy that you have the best chance with, because he does have those tools of being able to move the puck so well from his own end.
Yeah, Salin's you're talking about Travis Dermott. That Canucks hopefully becomes that for them. So, but Salin's we'll see where it happens. There's no high end defender in the Finnish side really this year. So, but he does have the potential to be that for sure. Let's talk about some forwards and Jani Nyman. He's been lighting it up so far this season. 33 points in 32 games in the Mestis League, which is the equivalent to the AHL from that Finnish Liga side. So, Tony, how would you describe his game? As a maybe a high-end prospect coming out of this draft.
Yeah, he's an interesting prospect because he is playing at that Mestis level, which is kind of a weird level because it's the AHL for the Finnish League, but the Finnish League is already kind of the 3rd or 4th best league in the world. So it's like, it's the 8th best league in the world. Would it be better just to play at a junior level and play a high end game there? And it's kind of a weird situation for him, but we've seen this a few times where I think you see him and you go, okay, he's got some decent physical ability to his game. He's got a little bit of a power element to his game. So playing against men is probably where he needs to hone that, because bullying junior players isn't going to get him very far just in terms of development. So getting him to that Messis level kind of makes sense. But he's a decent skater for his size. He pressures the puck carriers pretty well. He does a lot of nice things away from the puck as well. I don't know where his ceiling is, though, because you're seeing him, like, again, play against men at the Mestis level, and you don't know what exactly his game will turn into. He's one of these guys like I have a lot of questions about going forward, but you see little flashes of skill. You see him taking a really nice shot. You see little elements of his game that look high end or closer to high end than you were expecting. And you're like, man, like if we get him in the second round, like late second round, early third round, that's a pretty good spot for a guy like this.
Yeah, I mean, you look, I mean, teams are always looking for offensive guys that can do this. I mean, yeah, like you say, it's hard to kind of judge that where he is playing, but you know, you produce, you're going to get some eyes on you, and he's definitely doing that. Let's talk about another guy, Aleksanteri Kaskimäki. Love these names. These Finnish names are the best. So he's currently ranked 20th amongst European skaters, 40 points in 31 games. He's playing in the Finnish junior league, which is a little lower. Is he someone that can rise higher into the ranks of, you know, a high end prospect in this draft, Tony?
Well, he's a guy that I know a lot of people like because he does score a ton. He scores in bunches. And he's not super undersized. I think he's 6 foot, if I'm not mistaken. So you look at a guy like this and you're like, okay, he has a decent pro frame. He scores in bunches at the junior level in the Finnish league. So what is it that's holding him back? And I think honestly, what's holding him back is you watch him play a lot of times and you're like, that's fun. Like that'll work in junior hockey, but will that work at the NHL level? He does a lot of, I call it junior habits, where he's kind of toying with guys on the outside and then kind of makes a move to the middle when the slower oversized defenseman loses his balance or something like that. And that's when he kind of makes those moves. It's not necessarily him driving to those areas and creating the play. It's him waiting for an opportunity to strike a weakness. And that's a game that can work at the NHL level. We see it work all the time.
Yeah.
I think John Tavares is kind of pretty good at that, but obviously very, very different players. I think Kaskimäki is a really skilled guy. He's got a lot of fun factor to his game, but the translatability I don't think is quite there. So again, he's a guy that you take a risk on in the second or third round, maybe even fourth if he falls that far. And you go, maybe this turns into something. Like wait for him to get to the pro level probably next year and see what he can do there, because this is a kid that's probably a long-term development, but it could be a worthy development.
Draft isn't always about the next year.
Exactly.
You know, you gotta look down the road, and guys that you know may be looking maybe a little less in their draft year, and all of a sudden, you know, 2-3 years down the road, they're in the NHL scoring. This is a big. I always compare it. Like I just looked at Sebastian Aho was drafted really low. I didn't know how much that he was drafted so low.
Yeah,
and he's probably one of the best Finnish players in the NHL now. So
yeah, he's the other guy I go to when people ask me about Brad Lambert. I'm like, well, look at Sebastian Aho. He didn't produce in his draft year a ton. He did produce a little bit more than Lambert is right now, but it was the same things. People were going, what is his skills going to do at the NHL level, because he can't produce against men in the Liga? And it's like, well, yeah, but he's also 17 or 18 doing like not being able to produce at the Liga level. So wait till he's 21, then he probably will be able to.
Yeah,
and let's also skip over the fact that Toronto could have drafted him too. So
there's 31 other teams at the time.
Yeah.
I know. I hate myself, you know.
He hasn't failed to score 20 goals in this league yet.
So you're saying he's good.
Saying he's pretty good. So, but yeah, that's a good comparison for that. You know, you never know. You draft a guy, see what happens. Let's finish it off with another guy, Mikko Matikka. One name, he's got a lot of potential, but he's fallen a bit in the rankings lately. Tony, why do you think that is? Why he's dropped a bit?
I think it's just because he hasn't been that good. Like he's put up points. Like don't get me wrong. Like he's got over a point a game, if I'm not mistaken, almost 20 goals. Yeah, he's got 19 goals in 30 games, so he's scoring. But I think he's this traditional 6'3" guy who is able to take advantage of guys with his size and everything. He's playing at the junior level at 6'3", almost 200 pounds or over 200 pounds. And it's like, yeah, like you should have advantages there. Like there's no reason you shouldn't be scoring your lights out there, especially as a goal scorer who can get to the net. And if you draft him as that kind of player, then that's probably what you're going to get, because his skating is clunky at times. He doesn't move all that super, super well. So you're questioning some translatability or how high in the lineup you can play at the NHL level. But if you're looking at him and you're going, maybe we get a Soderblom out of him. I know Detroit fans love Elmer Soderblom, and he's done nothing but provide ridiculous highlights for a 6'7" guy. Like it's crazy, like the stuff that this guy does. So maybe you draft Matikka as a guy like that, where you're like, maybe he turns into a guy that we can throw in the third or fourth line and be a productive guy. or he's a guy that ends up being a really good Finnish league player, and that's all he ends up being. But certainly worth a pick. But yeah, he has fallen down the board this year, and I think it's just because he's been kind of meh. And the one thing I will mention, though, is the reason he hasn't played at the league level is because he's going to the University of Denver next year. So once he goes pro, he can't follow through with that commitment. So he's probably chosen not to. I know there's been a few players that have done that in the last few years that have chosen not to go to the next level so that they could keep their college commitment. And maybe that's just kind of what has been the factor for him. Maybe he is this guy that when he goes to college, we're like, oh, like he can do a lot of this stuff against guys a little bit older than him and everything. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does in his D+1. But right now he's a guy that I think a lot of teams have in the middle round, and they're like, maybe he's something, but we don't really know.
Yeah. Well, probably worth something, probably worth a flyer for sure.
Oh, for sure.
And you mentioned the size, the physicality too. Like, he has that size going for him, but he doesn't quite utilize that to his advantage, like the Slafkovsky, as we talked about before. So, and again, the opportunistic is obviously great, but again, you want to see more because there were talks of him being like a first rounder at times, and then he just kept falling and falling and falling. And it's like, well, what's going on now? So now we have a better gauge of what's going on. And if he does perform well at the collegiate level, then some team's going to look out really well making that selection.
For sure. It's going to be interesting to see what he does when he gets over here and plays some North American hockey here. So, it'll be interesting to watch where he goes in the draft and what he does afterwards for sure. That's the show on, we've talked about Finnish players. We talked about the CHL and NHL Top Prospects Game. Let's finish it off with what we usually do on this show is the prospects of the week. We highlight prospects we kind of want to just put a spotlight on. It doesn't have to be draft eligible. It could be anyone that you want to shout out to, give some love to. So let's start with you, Peter. Who's your prospect of the week?
Yeah, my prospect of the week is from the Top Prospects Game, and I'm going to go with Reed Dick. I mean, the way that he was able to come in halfway through the game, well, obviously, you want to split the goaltending duty. So for him to come in halfway through the game, make a nice glove save, and then in the third period, make three really solid and difficult saves back to back was really impressive. Stopping all 23 shots that he faced. And, he's ranked 26 on Central Scouting, and his numbers do not look great with current, but I would say that, the fact that he was able to play against tough competition, despite being it for one game, I think he really stood out and he held his own. So I'm giving him a big shout out, and hopefully maybe he's one of those goaltenders that can possibly rise up and, maybe not rise high in the rankings, but at least leaves a lasting impression for, teams for him to get more looks at.
Yeah, well, he definitely, caught some people's eye for sure. And that's what you do in these games. I mean, some of the lower end guys that may not have had a chance, they are now on the radar for sure. So good job for him. Great shout out. Devin, who's your prospect of the week?
Well, I had the pleasure of watching some NCAA tournament hockey yesterday, and I showed some love to my Western Michigan Broncos on last night's Grind Line episode. So now I'm going to show some love to a Michigan Wolverine, and that is Brendan Brisson, who amongst that, vastly talented team over there in Ann Arbor, I heard his name a lot yesterday. He seemed to have his nose in a little bit of everything in that game against American International. I believe he had a goal and 2 assists, which I believe was the most points on the team in that game. First round pick of the Golden Knights in 2020. Just a good player that, well-rounded. He seems to do a little bit of everything. I think I think there's a lot of players on that team that are going to be signing contracts once their run is done. And I think he's going to be one that's going to be making his way over to Nevada when all is said and done for the Wolverines.
Sure, on a stacked team, and they're going to be more stacked next year too.
Oh man, it's not even going to be
the
fun.
guys that are committed to that team.
They've got a pipeline going like no other. Holy cow.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous.
Now, will the Golden Knights trade him?
Yeah.
Well, the Golden Knights trade him
next year. Yeah,
I was going to say next year, because at this point they might need him to make the playoffs.
He's going to be the goaltender they're going to trade for.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Tony, who do you have as your prospect of the week?
My prospect of the week, I'm going to go with Wyatt Johnson from the Windsor Spitfires. Going to go with the kid that plays in my hometown. The kid's been incredible, leading the OHL in scoring, 107 points right now, just past Taylor Hall's highest point total with the Spitfires. So you know he's having a good year. This kid has been absolutely fun to watch. I've enjoyed almost every game I've went to the Spits this year, because every game this kid seems to put on a show. He really has elevated his stock, and he's making a lot of people, including myself, who thought the Stars took him maybe a little bit too early, look a little bit silly, because man, has this kid been unreal, both as a goal scorer, as a playmaker. There's been so many times where you're watching him, he just dangles a team. Like, he's got so much talent. It's been really impressive. But I also did want to give a shout out to Reed Dick that Peter mentioned, because in the press box, there was no cheering. Obviously, like, no one cheers up there because you got to be a professional. The only pop from the press box was that Reed Dick back-to-back save, or back-to-back saves. When he made the third save with the glove, everyone in the press box went, "Oh!" and everyone stood up. Like, the GMs that were in there stood up, like the scouts, everyone. It was crazy. It was a ton of fun. And but yeah, Reed Dick had one hell of a game.
Yeah, good for him. I think he definitely turned some scouts' opinion, or turned their heads. Definitely for him, especially that reaction, for sure. Well, I'm going to go with a guy that is a Canucks prospect, traded from got him from the San Jose Sharks a while ago. Broke Elias Pettersson's rookie scoring record in the SHL. Yes, he is a much older player when he's doing this, so you don't want to say he's going to be Elias Pettersson, because that's just out of the realm. No way. He's not going to be that type of player. If he does make it to the NHL at one point, he'll probably be a third, fourth line guy, but what he's you can't discount what he did in the breaking that SHL record. I mean, he's got 26 goals now, and I'm working on a piece on him right now, and he's got the second most primary points per 60 minutes according to Pick 224. So in that league, so I mean that's pretty impressive to me, and he's got 13 power play goals as well. A lot of his production's on the power play. I mean, look at that what you will, but he's got a great shot. His skating may still need a bit of development to actually make it in the NHL, but I still think he can make it over. It just has to be, the Canucks have to sign him, get him over here, playing the AHL, see where he goes from there. But he's been impressive, and Canucks need all the prospects they can get right now that can actually do something at the NHL level at some point. So he's my prospect of the week, just for what he did in this last week, breaking that record, and his production so far this year. Oh, that's the show. Thanks, Tony, for coming on and discussing prospects and Finnish prospects and all that stuff. Great wealth of expertise. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, of course, guys. I'm always happy to talk prospects, and I always love talking to Finns, because no one likes talking about them.
Oh, there's another league. I think we got a comment on that. They wanted to see Finnish guys next, so we deliver, as we always do here on Prospect Corner. So next week we'll be talking more on the leagues. We're probably going to go to maybe Slovakia next. Czechia. I wanted to say Czech Republic all of a sudden there, but Czechia. So it's gonna be fun talking prospects again. So thanks for joining us on the Prospect Corner. Make sure you're signed up for that Morning Skate newsletter at morningskate.io. Great wealth of information there every morning. Definitely check that out. Check out Tony's work on Sports Illustrated and Hockey News, and definitely check out that Game Tape with Tony. That's a great a great podcast, and a great idea to do that with the different prospects. It's a fun thing to watch for sure. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time on the Prospect Corner.